The air inside the large gymnasium felt heavy and sticky. It was one of those hot spring days where the fans just pushed the warm air around without cooling anything down. Outside, the sun was shining brightly on the parking lot, but inside, the mood was dull and gray. It was the time of year for the big school assembly. All the students from different grades were crowded together on the metal bleachers. There was a constant hum of whispering voices, squeaking of sneakers on the floor, and the thumping of backpacks being shifted around. Everyone just wanted to go home near the back of the room. In the top row of the bleachers sat a 17-year-old boy named Leo. He was quiet and kept mostly to himself. He was wearing a white dress shirt that was a little too tight around the shoulders and pants that were just a bit too short. Showing his socks when he sat down, they were hand-me-downs from an older cousin, and Leo did his best to keep them clean and neat. But today, luck was not on his side. At lunch, disaster had struck. Leo had bought a cheap meatball sub from the cafeteria counter. It was greasy and overflowing with red sauce. As he took a bite, the soft bread ripped. A large glob of bright red marinara sauce fell right onto the middle of his white shirt. It landed right over his heart. He had tried to scrub it off with a wet paper towel, but that only made it worse, spreading the red stain into a large pinkish blotch. Now, he sat with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, trying to hide the mark. He felt embarrassed, hoping that if he stayed small and quiet, nobody would notice him. On the stage below, Principal Mercer was pacing back and forth. The principal was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that rarely showed a smile. He believed in order, rules, and looking sharp. He wore a perfectly pressed suit and a tie that was exactly straight. To him, a student's appearance was a reflection of their character. He stood behind the wooden podium, tapping the microphone to make sure it was working. The sharp screeching sound made everyone in the gym cover their ears. "Settle down," Principal Mercer's voice boomed through the speakers. It echoed off the walls. "Settle down, everyone. I know it's Friday afternoon, and I know you want to leave, but we have important things to discuss today." The students groaned quietly. The whispers died down, but most people were looking at their phones or staring at the ceiling. "We are here to talk about excellence," Mercer continued, his voice serious and loud. "We are here to talk about standards. This school prepares you for the real world. In the real world, people do not walk around looking like they just rolled out of bed. They take pride in themselves. They look the part." As he spoke, Mercer's eyes scanned the crowd like a hawk hunting for prey. He looked at the students in the front row who were sitting up straight. Then he looked higher, scanning the back rows where the kids usually slouched. That was when he saw it. He saw the white shirt with the giant red stain. He saw the boy trying to hide it. Mercer stopped talking in the middle of his sentence. The silence in the gym grew heavy, because he had stopped pacing. He narrowed his eyes and pointed a finger directly at the back row. "You there?" Mercer said. His voice wasn't just a speech anymore. It was an accusation. "Yes, you. In the white shirt, stand up." Leo's heart jumped into his throat. He felt the blood rush to his face, making his cheeks burn hot. He looked around, hoping the principal was pointing at someone behind him. But the row behind him was empty. Everyone turned their heads to look at him. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto Leo. He slowly uncrossed his arms, and the red stain was revealed. He tried to pull the fabric of the shirt to stretch it out, hoping it would look smaller, but it didn't work. He stood up on the shaky metal bleachers. "Come down here," Principal Mercer ordered, waving his hand toward the stage. "Right now." Leo felt his legs shake as he stepped carefully down the bleacher stairs. Each step felt like a mile. The metal clanged under his shoes, and the sound seemed to echo through the entire gym. He could hear students giggling and whispering as he passed. "Look at his shirt," someone whispered loudly. "Oh man, he is in trouble," another voice laughed. Leo walked down the long aisle toward the stage. He felt small. He felt like the stain was glowing like a neon sign. He kept his head down, watching his shoes hit the polished wooden floor of the basketball court. When he reached the stage, he had to climb up the side stairs. Principal Mercer stood in the center of the stage, waiting for him. The principal's face looked angry. Like he had personally been offended by the stain. Leo stood on the stage, blinded by the bright lights hanging from the ceiling. He could see the rows and rows of students looking up at him. It felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "Look at him, everyone," Mercer said, turning Leo so he faced the crowd. "Look at this shirt." Leo wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "This is what I am talking about," Mercer continued, his voice dripping with disappointment. "We are trying to build a community of leaders here. We are trying to build excellence. And then we have students walking around looking like this." Mercer leaned in close to Leo's face. "Son, do you think this is appropriate? Do you think looking like a mess is respecting your school?" Leo swallowed hard. His throat was dry. "I had an accident at lunch, sir," Leo mumbled quietly. "An accident?" Mercer mocked him. "An accident is spilling a drop of water. This is negligence. You look sloppy. You look like you don't care. And if you don't care about how you look, I assume you don't care about your work either." The principal turned back to the crowd. "See, this is the problem. Apathy. Laziness. It spreads like a disease if we let it." He gestured to the grand piano that was sitting in the corner of the stage. It was polished and black, covered in a thin layer of dust. It was there for the upcoming spring concert, but nobody had played it yet. Julian, Mercer said, using the wrong name on purpose, to show he didn't even know him. "Since you are already up here embarrassing yourself, maybe we can make this useful. I want to see if you have any talent at all, or if you are just taking up space." Leo looked at the piano with wide eyes. He knew how to play. He played every day on an old keyboard at home. But he had never played in front of anyone before, especially not like this. "Go sit at the piano," Mercer commanded, crossing his arms. The crowd watched with anticipation. They thought this was a joke. They thought the shy, messy boy was about to be made a fool of. Leo walked slowly to the bench. The wood felt cold. He sat down, his back to the audience. He placed his hands on his knees, trembling. "Play something," Mercer said, his voice cruel and loud. "Show us you aren't a total waste of time. Let's see if you can hit a single note without making a mistake." The gym was silent, waiting for the humiliation. Leo took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at the black and white keys. They were dusty, but they were familiar. He thought about his small room at home, the late nights, and the way the music made him feel safe when nothing else did. He closed his eyes for a second to block out the lights and the stairs. Then he lifted his hands and placed them gently on the keys. Principal Mercer stood over him, his shadow stretching across the glossy lid of the piano. The man looked like a giant from where Leo was sitting. The lights overhead were blinding, making it hard to see the faces in the crowd, but Leo could feel them. Hundreds of eyes were burning into his back. He could hear the restlessness in the bleachers, the shuffling of feet, the coughing and the quiet giggles of the popular kids near the front. It was a terrible, heavy feeling, like a stone sitting on his chest. "Are you deaf, son?" Mercer's voice boomed through the microphone, causing the speakers to crackle. "I told you to play. Or are you frozen? Stage fright already? We haven't even started." Leo's hands hovered over the keys. His fingers were trembling so badly that he had to clench them into fists to make them stop. He felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. At school, he was the ghost. He was the boy who sat in the back, wore the old clothes, and got good grades but never spoke up. He liked it that way. Being invisible meant you were safe. But now, Principal Mercer had dragged him into the spotlight, not to praise him, but to use him as a bad example. Leo started to say, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, but no words came out. He felt small and pathetic. Mercer shook his head, making a loud tisk-tisk sound that echoed through the gymnasium. He turned to the audience, throwing his hands up in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I was talking about. Look at this. No confidence, no preparation." He sits there like a statue. Principal paced back and forth behind the bench, his shoes squeaking on the stage floor. He was enjoying the power he had in this moment. He loved the feeling of being in control, and he loved making an example out of someone who couldn't fight back. See? When you don't apply yourself, this is what happens, Mercer lectured the students. You end up paralyzed when life asks you to perform. You end up with... Mercer gestured vaguely at the stain on Leo's back. Well, you end up a mess. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It wasn't the kind of laughter that follows a joke. It was the nervous, mean laughter of teenagers who were relieved they aren't the ones on stage. Leo squeezed his eyes shut for a second. He wished he could disappear. He wished he could just melt into the floorboards. Just play a scale, Julian, Mercer said, getting his name wrong again and not caring. Play a C major scale. Do you know what that is? Do you know the difference between a white key and a black key? Go ahead, impress us. The sarcasm in Mercer's voice was thick. He was daring Leo to fail. He was setting a trap. If Leo refused, Mercer would call him disobedient and send him to the office. If Leo tried and played badly, Mercer would mock him and tell him to quit wasting his time. It seemed like there was no way out. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked down at the keyboard. It was a beautiful instrument, much nicer than the chipped plastic keyboard he had at home. The black keys were smooth, and the white keys were ivory, yellowed slightly with age. They looked like old teeth. Under different circumstances, he would have been excited to touch them. He would have wanted to test the tone to see how loud the bottom notes could get, or how soft the high notes could sing. But now, the piano felt like a weapon aimed at him. I'm waiting, Mercer said. He leaned down, his face right next to Leo's ear. Don't keep the entire school waiting. We have better things to do than watch you struggle. Leo took a deep breath. He smelled the dusty scent of the stage curtains and the faint smell of the principal's colon, something spicy and strong that made Leo feel sick to his stomach. He thought about running. He thought about standing up and walking out of the gym, but he knew he couldn't. His legs felt like lead. Besides, if he ran now, he would be the laughingstock of the school for the rest of the year. He had to do something. He lifted his right hand. His palm was sweaty. He hesitated. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that is so loud it hurts your ears. The air conditioning units hummed loudly in the background. Someone in the back dropped a water bottle, and the plastic clatter sounded like a gunshot. Leo's fingers hovered over the keys. He didn't want to play a scale. A scale was boring. It was what you played in kindergarten music class. Mercer wanted him to play a scale because Mercer thought he was stupid. Mercer thought he didn't know anything else. Then, a memory flashed in Leo's mind. He remembered his mother, sitting on the edge of his bed when he was younger, showing him how to hold his hand curved like he was holding a small orange. Don't let them tell you what you can't do, Leo, she used to say. Music is yours. It belongs to you. No one can take that away. He looked at the keys again. He wasn't just a boy with a stained shirt and cheap clothes. He was a pianist. He spent hours every day after school teaching himself songs he heard on the radio. He downloaded sheet music from the library computer. He practiced until his fingers ached. This man, this principal in the expensive suit, didn't know anything about him. Mercer only saw the surface. He didn't see the hours of practice. He didn't see the passion. Leo decided he wasn't going to play a scale. He wasn't going to give Mercer the satisfaction of seeing him play like a beginner. If he was going to be humiliated, he was going to do it on his own terms. He was going to play something real. He placed his left hand on the low end of the keyboard, down near the left side. The notes down there were deep and rumbled in your chest. He rested his fingers on the keys, finding the positions by muscle memory. It felt right. It felt like coming home. Principal Mercer sighed loudly, checking his watch. Okay, this is ridiculous. If you aren't going to play, then get off the stage. You're wasting everyone's time. Mercer reached out as if to grab Leo's shoulder to pull him up off the bench. But before Mercer could touch him, Leo pushed down on the keys. The sound that came out of the piano wasn't a simple plink or a gentle chime. It was a deep, rolling wave of sound that seemed to shake the dust off the stage rafters. Leo struck in a minor chord, but he didn't just hit it. He leaned into it. He played it with force. The sound exploded through the gymnasium, cutting through the thick air like a knife. Mercer jumped back, startled by the sudden noise. His hand froze in midair. The students in the front row flinched. It was so loud, so aggressive, that it instantly silenced the whispers and the giggles. The sound hung in the air, vibrating through the floor and the wooden bleachers. It was a serious sound. A sound that demanded respect. Leo didn't stop to see if anyone was watching. He didn't wait for permission. He let his right hand fly across the high keys, playing a fast, complicated run of notes that sounded like rain falling on a tin roof. It was the beginning of a piece he had practiced 1,000 times in his bedroom, but never for an audience. His fingers, which had been shaking just a moment ago, suddenly were steady. They knew exactly where to go. The moment his skin touched the ivory, the fear vanished. He wasn't Leo the outcast anymore. He wasn't the boy with the stained shirt. He was a musician, and he had something to say. The sound that exploded from the piano wasn't just a note. It was a physical force. It seemed to push the heavy air right out of the gymnasium. The deep, vibrating chord hung in the air for a second, echoing off the brick walls and the high ceiling. It was a sound that demanded attention, a sound that was so full of emotion it felt like a shout. For a split second, the entire room was frozen. The laughter died instantly. The whispering stopped. Even the ventilation system seemed to pause. Principal Mercer took a sharp step backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His face, which had been twisted in a cruel smirk just a moment ago, went blank. He looked at his hand, then back at the boy on the bench, clearly confused. He had expected a clumsy mistake. He had expected a wrong note, a timid plink, or complete silence. He did not expect a wall of sound to hit him in the chest. Leo didn't give anyone time to recover. He didn't wait for the principal to yell at him. He didn't look up to see the teachers covering their mouths in shock. He closed his eyes tight and let his hands take over. He wasn't thinking about the stain on his shirt anymore. He wasn't thinking about the 200 students staring at his back. He was only thinking about the music. His right hand began to move. It wasn't a slow, struggling movement. It was a blur. His fingers danced across the white and black keys with a speed that seemed impossible. He was playing a complex, rushing pattern of notes arpeggios that tumbled over one another like water, cascading down a steep waterfall. The notes were crisp and clear, cutting through the silence like glass. The piece he was playing was difficult. It was a piece that required strength in the left hand and lightness in the right. Most students in the school band couldn't have played the first few bars, let alone with this kind of intensity. But Leo's fingers knew exactly where to go. They had traveled this path 1,000 times in the safety of his bedroom. Late at night, when the rest of the world was asleep, in the audience, the mood shifted instantly. The bullies who had been laughing seconds ago were now sitting in stunned silence. A boy named Kyle, who usually sat in the back and threw paper balls, froze with his mouth halfway open. He looked at his friends, and they looked back at him. None of them knew what to say. They all knew Leo as the quiet kid who kept his head down. They had no idea he possessed this kind of power. The transformation was shocking to watch. The boy who looked like he was trying to disappear had suddenly filled the entire room with his presence. On the stage, Principal Mercer tried to regain control. He felt like the situation was slipping away from him. He straightened his jacket and took a step toward the piano, his face turning red. "Now, wait a minute," Mercer shouted over the music, but the music was getting louder. Leo was attacking the keys now, playing a section of the song that was aggressive and stormy. The piano was roaring. Mercer's voice was drowned out completely. He looked ridiculous standing there, shouting at a boy who was clearly in a different world. He took another step forward, raising his hand as if to turn the piano off. But then he stopped. Something about the music made him hesitate. It wasn't just noise. It was beautiful. Even a man as cold and strict as Mercer could hear the skill in the performance. He could hear the perfect timing, the way the notes blended together into a rich tapestry of sound. He lowered his hand slowly, a look of genuine disbelief washing over his features. He stood there awkwardly while the music swelled around him. Leo's body changed as he played. He was no longer hunched over, trying to hide himself. He sat up straight, his back arched. His foot pressed down on the sustain pedal, holding the notes and letting them ring out into the vast room. He was channeling everything he felt into the instrument. He poured his loneliness into the low, heavy notes. He poured his frustration into the fast, sharp runs. He poured his hope into the melody that floated above the chaos. The gymnasium was usually a place of squeaking sneakers and buzzing announcements. It was a place of boredom and routine. But right now, it felt like a concert hall. The acoustics, usually terrible for speeches, seemed to embrace the piano. The sound bounced off the floor and the bleachers surrounding the students. It was a raw human sound. It wasn't a recording. It was happening right there, created by a boy they had ignored for years. About halfway through the song, the tempo changed. The storm of fast notes slowed down. Leo's hands moved to the middle of the keyboard. He began to play a melody that was heartbreakingly sad and sweet. It was a singing tone, soft and gentle. The contrast made the silence of the audience even deeper. Everyone was leaning forward now. The seniors in the front row stopped checking their phones. The teachers stopped grading papers. The janitor near the door paused with his broom in his hand. This was the part of the music that felt true. It didn't sound like a robot playing a perfect sequence. It sounded like a person talking. It sounded like Leo was telling a story without words. He played a phrase that was so tender it made some of the students feel a strange tightness in their chests. They realized they weren't just watching a performance. They were witnessing a moment of pure honesty. The boy who never spoke was finally saying everything he needed to say. Principal Mercer looked out at the crowd. He saw that he had lost control completely. The students weren't looking at him anymore. They weren't listening to his lecture about excellence. They were captivated by the boy on the piano bench. Mercer felt a strange sensation in his stomach, feeling of insecurity. He looked at his own suit, expensive and stiff. He looked at his position of authority. It all felt hollow compared to the raw talent coming out of that dusty instrument. Leo's left hand began to weave a bass line again, steady and strong. His right hand took off, playing the intricate melody with renewed energy. He was nearing the end of the piece. The physical effort was showing on his face. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't wipe it away. His dark hair was mussed. His face was intense, focused, and alive. He looked nothing like the shy student who had walked onto the stage moments ago. He looked powerful. The music built up again, faster and higher. It was like a train rushing down a track, gathering speed. The notes became a blur of motion. The sound was filling every corner of the gym. It was vibrating the floor under the students' feet. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Everyone knew it was coming to a climax. They were all holding their breath, waiting to see where he would take them. Leo didn't hold back. He slammed his hands into the keys for the final run. It wasn't violent, but it was firm and confident. He played a series of chords that were bright and triumphant, ringing out like bells. He threw his whole body into it, swaying slightly with the rhythm. The music soared, lifting the spirits of everyone in the room, even the principal who had tried to humiliate him. For a brief moment, the stain on the shirt, the cheap clothes, and the mean words didn't exist. There was only the sound, and it was magnificent. The final crash of sound seemed to suck the air right out of the room. Leo didn't just hit the last chord. He leaned into it with his whole upper body, just putting his weight behind the notes until they rang out like a church bell on a Sunday morning. Then, in a flash of movement, his hands lifted off the keys. He pulled them back to his chest, his fingers curling into loose fists. Silence rushed back into the space. It wasn't the bored, restless silence from before the assembly started. It was a heavy, thick silence that pressed against everyone's ears. The final vibrations of the piano strings hummed in the air, fading away slowly, second by second. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Even the ventilation system seemed to pause, as if the machine itself was holding its breath. For 5 long seconds, the gymnasium was completely still. It felt like time had stopped. Principal Mercer was standing a few feet away, his mouth slightly open, his hands still half raised, as if he meant to stop the music, but had forgotten how. He looked at the dusty piano, then at the boy sitting on the bench. The sneer was gone from his face, replaced by a look of total confusion. He looked like a man who had opened a door expecting a closet and found a mountain range instead. The control he prized so highly had vanished, dissipated by the sheer power of the sound. Leo sat there, his chest heaving up and down. He was breathing hard, the way you do after running a long race. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Slowly, the adrenaline began to fade, and the reality of where he was started to creep back in. He could feel the heat of the stage lights on his neck. He could smell the dusty velvet of the curtains. He kept his eyes fixed on the piano keys, terrified to look up. He thought that maybe they were all stunned because he had played too loudly. He thought maybe they were angry that he had interrupted the principal. He waited for Mercer to yell. He waited for the microphone to screech again. He waited for the laughter to return, louder and meaner than before. He prepared himself to stand up and walk off the stage in shame, but then a sound broke the silence. It wasn't a boo. It wasn't a shout. It was the sharp, distinct sound of two hands clapping together. Clap, clap, clap. Leo flinched slightly. He turned his head just a fraction to the left. Down in the front row, a girl with glasses and a messy ponytail stood up. She was a sophomore, someone Leo had seen in the hallways but never spoken to. She was looking right at him, not at the stain on his shirt, but at his face. She was clapping with a steady rhythm, a look of fierce admiration on her face. Within moments, the music teacher, Mr. Greer, stood up from his seat near the sidewall. He didn't just clap. He put his fingers in his mouth and let out a sharp, piercing whistle of approval. That was the spark the room needed. The dam broke. The silence shattered as the applause erupted. It started as a wave and then turned into a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the slow, tired clapping people do when they are bored. It was loud, chaotic, and enthusiastic. Students all over the gymnasium were on their feet. The ones who had been whispering and giggling earlier were now screaming and cheering. Some were stomping their feet on the metal bleachers, creating a thundering drum roll sound that vibrated through the floor. Leo blinked, his eyes widening. He slowly lifted his head and looked out into the sea of faces. The lights were bright, making him squint, but he could see them. They were standing. They were smiling. They were looking at him like he was a hero. The boy who usually tried to be invisible was suddenly the center of the universe. It was a shock so intense it made his head spin. He saw Kyle, the boy who threw paper balls, standing with his jaw dropped, clapping his hands together hard. He saw the cheerleaders near the front, their pom-poms forgotten, looking at him with wide eyes. Even the teachers who usually sat in the back grading papers had put down their pens and were smiling, but the most important reaction was happening, just a few feet away. Principal Mercer looked like he had swallowed a bug. His face was turning a dark shade of red, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. He looked out at the crowd of cheering students, realizing that his plan to humiliate Leo had backfired completely. He had tried to make Leo look like a fool, but instead he had given him a stage. By trying to break Leo's spirit, he had accidentally let everyone see how strong it was. Mercer took a step toward the microphone, his hand trembling slightly. He wanted to grab it. He wanted to shout, "Sit down. Quiet. Order." He wanted to regain his authority and punish the boy for taking over the assembly. But as he reached for the stand, the roar of the crowd got louder. It was a wall of noise that pushed him back. He looked at the students, and for the first time in years, he looked afraid. He realized that if he tried to stop this moment, if he tried to scold the boy now, the students wouldn't listen to him. He would look like a villain in a movie. He would look small. So Mercer did something he rarely did. He hesitated. He pulled his hand back from the microphone. He took a step back into the shadows of the curtain, folding his arms tightly across his chest. He watched, helpless and fuming, as the scene played out without him. On the bench, Leo felt the tears stinging the corners of his eyes. He quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand, not wanting anyone to see him cry. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being liked. He felt a strange, warm sensation blooming in his chest, a feeling of relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. He didn't have to hide anymore. They had seen him and they didn't turn away. He took a deep, shaky breath and slowly stood up. He didn't bow. He didn't raise his hands in the air like a rock star. He just stood there, looking out at the crowd with a shy, small smile. He felt the heavy weight of the stained shirt, but for the first time that day, it didn't feel like a badge of shame. It was just a shirt. It didn't matter anymore. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. It was a long time for a high school assembly. Eventually, the noise began to die down, settling into a rhythmic clapping. Mr. Greer walked onto the stage, giving Leo a firm pat on the back that nearly knocked him over. The music teacher didn't say a word. He just smiled and nodded, a look of pure pride on his face. Leo looked back at the principal one last time. Mercer was standing in the corner, his face stormy, refusing to clap. In the past, that look would have terrified Leo, but now, Leo just looked at him. He realized that the principal's power was fake. It was based on fear and uniforms and rules. The power Leo had just felt, that was real. It came from inside him. Leo turned and walked off the stage. As he walked down the steps on the side, the students near the aisle reached out to give him high fives. He slapped a few hands, still in a daze. He walked back up the aisle toward his seat, but he didn't go to the back row. A group of students from the front row waved him over, making room for him on the bleachers. He sat down among them. The girl with the glasses smiled at him. "That was amazing," she whispered loudly. Leo just nodded. He looked down at his hands. They were still trembling a little bit, but now it wasn't from fear. He looked up at the empty stage, the piano sitting there in the spotlight. He had walked onto that stage as a nobody. He was walking off as a musician, and nothing would ever be the same again. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. It was the familiar sound that usually made students jump out of their seats and run for the exits, eager to start their weekend. But today, nobody moved immediately. The usual chaos of shuffling papers and zipping backpacks was replaced by a low, buzzing murmur. Everyone was talking about the same thing. They were talking about the music. Leo stood up from the bleachers where he had been sitting for the last few minutes. His legs felt weak, like jelly. But for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to run away and hide. He picked up his backpack and slung it over one shoulder. As he turned to walk down the aisle, the path cleared for him. Students stepped aside, not to avoid him like he was contagious, but to make room for him. Some nodded at him. Others gave him a thumbs up. A few just stared, their faces full of wonder, trying to reconcile the quiet boy they knew with the musician, who just commanded the room. He walked past the group of popular kids who usually ignored him. The tall boy who played on the football team looked up from his phone. "Hey," the boy said, bumping his fist against Leo's shoulder as he passed. It wasn't much, just a small gesture, but it meant everything. It was a password. It was an acceptance into a world he thought he was locked out of. Leo managed a small, nervous smile and kept walking. When he reached the gymnasium doors, he pushed them open and stepped out into the hallway. The air here was cooler, smelling of floor wax and old paper. Mr. Greer, the music teacher, was waiting for him by the water fountain. He looked serious. "That was quite a performance," Mr. Greer said, adjusting his glasses. He didn't smile, but his eyes were warm. "I've been teaching here for 15 years, Leo. I've never heard anything like that come out of that old piano." Leo looked down at his sneakers. I don't know. I was scared. Fear creates energy," the teacher said simply. "You used it. You have a gift, son. A real gift. We don't have a jazz band this year because we couldn't find a pianist good enough to lead it. I think we just found our leader." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a blue slip of paper hall pass. "Come by the music room on Monday morning. We need to talk about repertoire." Leo took the paper. His fingers were shaking again. He looked at the teacher, disbelief washing over him. "You want me to be in the band? But I don't have a nice suit." "And my shirt is," Mr. Greer smiled, a genuine, crinkly smile. "We don't care about the suit, Leo. We care about the music. See you Monday." The teacher walked away, leaving Leo standing in the hallway. He looked at the blue slip in his hand. It felt like a golden ticket. For years, he had walked through these school corridors feeling invisible, feeling like he didn't belong. Now, in the span of 5 minutes, He had been invited to join. He had a place. He walked out of the school building and into the afternoon sun. The parking lot was crowded with yellow buses and parents picking up their kids. Leo usually walked home. It was a long walk, about 40 minutes, but he didn't mind. He needed the time to clear his head today. As he walked, the events of the afternoon played over and over in his mind like a movie. He thought about Principal Mercer. He wondered what the man was doing right now. Probably in his office, fuming, plotting how to regain control. Leo realized he might get called to the office on Monday. He might get detention for disrupting the assembly, or for talking back. A small knot of anxiety formed in his stomach. But then he remembered the sound of the applause. He remembered the feeling of the keys under his fingers. He realized that no matter what punishment the principal gave him, Mercer could never take away the music. He couldn't take away the fact that for 5 minutes, Leo was better than him. He couldn't take away the respect Leo had earned. Leo tucked the hall pass safely into his pocket. He thought about his old keyboard at home. It was missing 2 keys, and the plug was loose, so he had to wiggle it to make it turn on. But it was his instrument. He thought about the hours he spent in his room after school, alone, teaching himself songs he heard on the radio. He used to think those hours were lonely, a way to escape a world where he didn't fit in. Now he realized those hours weren't lonely. They were training. He was preparing for this moment without even knowing it. By the time he reached his street, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. He lived in a small brick apartment building with chipped paint on the door. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and unlocked the door. The apartment was quiet. His mother wasn't home from work yet. Leo dropped his backpack on the floor and walked over to the window. He looked out at the city. He saw the cars driving by, the people walking their dogs, the kids playing in the park down the street. Everything looked the same, but he felt different. The world hadn't changed, but he had. He walked over to the corner of the living room, where his keyboard sat on a fold-out table. It looked small and pathetic compared to the grand piano at school. The C key was chipped, showing the plastic underneath. He sat down on the hard wooden bench. He reached out and turned the volume knob. A static hiss came out of the small speakers, followed by a faint digital piano sound. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt familiar, comfortable. He thought about the stain on his shirt. He looked down and saw it again, the big pinkish blotch right over his heart. It was still there. It hadn't magically disappeared just because he played well. In the grand scheme of things, it was just a stain. It was just a shirt. Leo closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He didn't play the loud, angry song he had played at school. Instead, he started to play something soft. He improvised a gentle melody, letting the notes flow freely. It was a melody of peace. It was a melody of belonging as he played. He heard the front door click open. His mother walked in, carrying a bag of groceries. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, and she had a stain on her work uniform, too, just like him. She stopped in the doorway when she heard the music. She set the groceries down on the kitchen counter with a thud and walked into the living room. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against the doorframe and listened. Leo didn't stop. He played for her. He let the music tell her that he was okay. He let the music tell her that things were going to be different now. He played a beautiful, complex chord that filled the small room with sound. When he finished, he opened his eyes and looked at her. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. She didn't ask him how his day was. She didn't ask him about the stain on his shirt. She just walked over, kissed him on the top of the head, and went back to the kitchen to start dinner. Leo sat at the keyboard for a long time, his hands resting on the keys. He looked out the window again. The sky was turning orange and purple as the sun set. He wasn't the invisible boy anymore. He was Leo, the pianist. He was the boy who shocked the school. And tomorrow, when he woke up, he would put on a clean shirt, walk into school, and hold his head high. The music was inside him, and nobody could ever take that away.